Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Risha Singh, and I led the UI UX design for this project. I'm going to be walking you through a demo of our project Orion, which stands for Optimal Risk Investment Outreach Navigator. It's a smart financial tool designed to help users, specifically financial advisors, to quickly compare investment funds and understand key risk metrics. The app is deployed using Azure Web App Services. We built this using Streamlit, which is a Python framework that powers the front end. And on the back end, we use Python with AI integration powered by RAG, which is Retrieval-Augmented Generation, and chain of thought prompting. These techniques help the model generate more grounded and structured answers. The styling of our page was done using CSS, and we used GPT-4 as a language model to generate reasoning-based responses. When it comes to the design, we wanted Orion to be easy to read, nice to look at. So on the left-hand side, we have our sidebar with three components. The chat component is what we are currently on. The analytics and settings components are ones that I will be going more in depth for later in this demo. In the center, we have our query box. So this is where the user can enter their queries. They can submit their queries either by pressing this button or by clicking the enter or return key on their device. And then we have the clear button. Then we also have some sample prompts up here so the user knows how they can frame their questions if they don't know how to. We also use the Infosys color palette here because it helps maintain a consistent brand identity. So Orion is built to handle a wide range of financial queries. Here are four prompt types it supports. We have risk analysis, fund comparisons, investor-based recommendations, and definitions of financial terms. Krish and I are going to walk you guys through a prompt from each of these four.
So before we get into the individual prompt examples, it's important to highlight what makes Orion different from general purpose AI tools like ChatGPT, Perplexity, or Gemini. Unlike those models, which are trained on a broad, unstructured internet data, Orion is purpose-built for financial advisory. It leverages a fine-tuned retrieval-augmented generation, a RAG pipeline with curated fund documents, risk metric files, and prospective data from trusted sources like Yahoo Finance and Morningstar. This means that every response is grounded in trusted, verifiable sources and formatted specifically for the way financial advisors think and work. Whether it's comparing funds or explaining metrics or generating client-ready recommendations, Orion delivers structured, context-rich outputs that go far beyond generic AI answers.
So for the first prompt, we are going to be focusing on risk analysis.
So while Risha is going to type out this text, the prompt, I'm just going to tell you what the prompt's about. So like Risha mentioned, it's about risk analysis. So we're going to evaluate the risk metric of a particular ticker. In our case, it is FTBFX of the last 5 and 10 years. Specifically, we're going to look at its standard deviation and Sortino ratio. So once again, we're gonna look at FTBFX over the last 5 and 10 years, and we're gonna specifically look at its standard deviation and Sortino ratios. We're gonna see how volatile it has been historically, and what does that imply about its risk profile compared to other bond funds in its class.
As you can see, we have the answer that comes up first in a shorter paragraph. The answer is great for users who don't want to go in depth and they just want the answer. But for the ones who do want to go in depth and want a deeper analysis, we have our detailed analysis section.
And I'm just going to add on a couple things for each of the outputs. For this output, the response starts with a summary interpretation. So FTBFX has shown moderate volatility, as you can see in the first line, with only modest downside protection, especially over the last 5 years. So in the first couple lines, it shows you the standard deviation over the last 10 years, 5 and 10 years, and its values. Next up, Orion then structures the output into clear sections, starting with the metrics table, then lists standard deviation, Sortino ratios, and then comparable to bond funds in its risk level, along with its asset size, yield, and other strategy notes, which are helpful. So as you can see, in the risk assessment section, it interprets the numbers, pointing out while that FTBFX's volatility is nearly identical to its peers, its short-term Shortino ratio is negative, and even over 10 years, it only slightly outperforms other funds, suggesting weak downside risk-adjusted returns. So in the first table, it shows you FTBFX's risk metrics, the 5-year, 10-year Sortino and standard deviation, some key details that is brought by the prospectus reports that we fed into the machine and the sources where it got its information from. The risk assessment section interprets the numbers, pointing out that while FTBFX's volatility is nearly identical to its peers, its short-term Sortino ratio is negative, and even over 10 years, it's only slightly outperforms other funds, suggesting weak downside risk-adjusted returns. So basically, the values, what we have in the table, we fed into the machine, the risk assessment puts actual qualitative analysis to its numbers. Next up, the investment implication section discusses how FTBFXs aligns with its category typical risk profile, but cautions that its track record may not appeal to its investors seeking stronger downside protection. And lastly, in additional consideration, Orion highlights how attractive a field is using like Morningstar reports and like other sources that we have fed into the machine. So this information is really helpful for a financial advisor making a thorough analysis for its client if it wants to go more in depth rather than just using its answer.
Down below, we have added a thumbs up and a thumbs down for user feedback. This system really helps us continually improve the experience of Orion. So I'm going to go to the Analytics tab. Here you can see that it records user feedback, it records errors, and also conversation and their timestamps. And then if we go to the Settings tab, so under System Status, we show that all the core components are working. This includes the variables, vector store, and language model. Under Data Management, users can clear conversation history or feedback logs. And then there's a debug information dropdown for internal troubleshooting. This setup helps us monitor performance and gives transparency around what's powering Orion. Now we're going to go back to the chat and we're going to enter our second prompt, which is about fund comparison.
Exactly what Risha said. Our second prompt is going to be fund comparison. Our first prompt was about risk analysis. So we were just taking a single ticker and we were comparing its risk levels to its similar bond funds in its category. In fund comparison, we're going to compare two different tickers. In this case, we're comparing VFIAX and PRBLX in terms of its Sharpe ratio, Trenier, and alpha ratio across a 10-year period. We're also going to see which one performs better in risk-adjusted terms for a long-term investor. So we're going to see in a given time how these two funds compare with its risk level. So The response begins with a quick high-level takeaway. As you can see, it says over the past 10 years, it gives you the VFIAX's name, PRBLX's name. It shows you the risk levels of Sharpe ratio, Trinner, and alpha as stated in the input. It shows you the values. Then after that, it comes into a conclusion also after showing the values. It says that both funds exhibit strong performance, but PRBLX's positive alpha and higher ratio suggests it has delivered superior risk adjustment results over the past decade. And this is all information that has been concluded from detailed analysis tab below. So first, the fund ranking and metrics table present core data like the asset size, the percent yield, and the requested ratios in a side-by-side format. Then the risk assessment explains what each metric reveals about the fund's performance, highlighting PRBLX's stronger risk-adjusted returns. Exactly like I said in the last response, it shows you how it takes numerical values and puts it through quantitative analysis to come up with conclusions in the risk assessment aisle. Next up, in the investment implication section, it adds deeper reasoning, pointing out that PRBLX's advantage is likely driven by its active management and ESG focus, while VFIAX remains a solid low cost index option. And this is again all information that we have inputted from our reports that we have pulled from public data into our RAG application. And another big thing is always additional consideration that might help a financial advisor bring in more detail when comparing funds or like recommending funds to a client. So this one brings in factors like ratio, style drift, talks more about the risk levels, and investors in the last line, if you can see, investors should weigh these advantages against cost and investment philosophy. And that's an important line because it shows that additional consideration may be a big driven possibility when coming into a conclusion for a client.
Now we're going to move on to our third prompt, which is an investor-based recommendation.
So as Risha is typing out this question, we have first gone through a risk analysis portion, second, a comparison portion, and now this one is very interesting because this is client-based focus. So, for example, a client is a low-risk investor looking for 3 to 4 mutual funds that are primarily invested in US assets. So we're gonna ask the machine if it could recommend funds with strong downside protection. So, strong downside protection meaning like high Sortino ratios and high Trinera ratios. And then we're gonna also take into consideration low standard deviation over the past 5 to 10 years. So this is a client-based focus. We're adding detail to what a client needs to bring 3 to 4 mutual funds primarily invested in US over a given time period. So as you can see, again, it's the same format, but in this case, it's picking out 3 to 4 different funds. In the first line, it shows that it's taking AGG, which is iShare Core US Aggregated Bond ETFs, Bond, which is another ticker, which means PIMCO Total Return, and then VWELX, which is Vanguard's Bellington's fund. So these are the three best funds for a client who has for a client which fits this profile. So the system filters the indexed financial data using thresholds for high Sortino, Trineo ratios, and low standard deviation, and also filters based on US asset location allocation. It returns a list of funds, and all of which would meet the criteria based on historical metrics of over 5 and 10 year periods. Then the risk assessment section breaks down the quantitative risk indicators, showing each fund has historically managed volatility and downside exposure. If you scroll up a little bit, Risha, the key details from here, these are really important too. I mean, you want to know what type of funds or stocks or how money is really distributed with each fund. What are they investing it? So as you can see in AGG, the key details are U.S. investment grade bonds, which perform low volatility. Bonds is U.S. investment grade bonds, which is active management in this case. And then VWELX's key details are so 60 to 70% are US value stocks, the other 30 to 40% are US bonds. So these are all mainly US assets. And then the investment implication portion provides model generated reasoning on why these funds are suitable for conservative profiles, highlighting their defensive allocation and strong historical Sharpe and Sortino ratios. And all of these are in bulleted points, and these, of course, help financial advisors so much because instead of a big chunk of a paragraph, these are all labeled and bulleted as you go down the list. And finally, additional consideration adds practical insights like as you can see, expense ratios, strategy styles, and minimum investment requirements. These all help a client come into, I mean, a financial advisor. All this information gets translated into an answer block, which, unlike, as I said before, ChatGPT, Gemini really does not have all of this live data in its system to like really come to a conclusion. Instead of giving like a summary, it has additional information to come and give a well-rounded response.
Now we're going to move on to our last prompt, which is definition based.
So not only does our machine, again, it does three things, right? It does risk analysis, fund comparison, investor centric based on a client's risk profile, time horizon. It can also answer simple definition questions. So what does a Sortino ratio measure? How is it different from a Sharpe ratio? And also explain a fund's metadata. It could be its asset class, expense ratio, or even inception dates, because we have all this information fed into our machine. So the model retrieves glossary definitions from embedded context documents and uses RAG to differentiate clearly between two metrics. Sortino focuses mainly on downside volatility, as you can see in the first line, and then while Sharpe considers total volatility, which could be upside and downside in this case. Then Orion switches to facts-based retrieval and pulls structured metadata on VBTLX, showing it an intermediate core bond fund as its asset class and its expense ratio of 0.05% in this case. The risk assessment portion again takes all of the values in the fund ranking and metrics and puts to some qualitative data. So the risk assessment compares the funds, the Sortino ratios, the Sharpe ratios, add interpretation. The negative Sharpe reflects overall volatility drag, while the midly positive Sortino implies more limited downside risk. Finally, in investment implications and additional consideration, Orion contextualizes the fund's performance, strategy, and cost, helping users understand how these risk metrics translate into real-world fund selection. So these are our four examples of four different types of questions or prompts a user can input for our machine. Another big thing which I wanted to go over was the use was to avoid multiple test pointers, so MTPs. So our UI UX design is very basic, and we didn't want to have too many buttons or too many different settings options to confuse us and to have a simple model to present. If a user is using an AI machine, for example, ChatGPT, the second you go into the website, it's very simple to use. And it's because anyone who uses an AI machine should just know how it's supposed to be used just by its UI UX design.
So that's an overview of Orion, and that concludes our demo. Thank you for watching.